All right, guys, so the first point we're going to look at is the T in TULIP, which commonly stands for total depravity. So what I'm going to do for all these, just kind of start the video, is read a definition that I think is a pretty good consensus. If you go online, you might find the points defined slightly differently depending on the group or their beliefs, but I thought these five I kind of pulled off site. I thought it was kind of the best overall one I could come up with. But obviously, again, you might see slightly different definitions as you look through different points. So I'll just read this. We'll pop it up on screen as well, and then we'll talk about it. Total depravity. Man is completely touched or affected by sin in all that he is. In nature, he's completely fallen, but is not as bad as he could be in action. Like, for example, not every single action we do is murder. We're all sinful, but we could obviously be worse. But furthermore, this total depravity means that the unregenerate will not, of their own free will, choose to receive Christ. It is the unbeliever who is deceitful and wicked, full of evil, loves darkness rather than light, and does evil, does not seek God, nor does any good, is ungodly, dead in his sins, by nature a child of wrath, cannot accept or understand spiritual things, and a slave of sin.
Yeah, so total depravity is something I would completely agree with. It's the effects of original sin. It's the fact that we can't save ourselves. And a couple of kind of classic verses that just really illustrate this, both from Romans actually. So Romans 3:23 says that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So that's without exception for every one of us. And then Romans 6:23 kind of highlights this condition even more when it says that the wages of sin is death. In other words, what we have earned naturally through our fallen nature, through our actions, through our rebelliousness against God, is death, and not just in the sense of bodily death, but an eternal separation from God. And so I really believe that it's important to accept, even though it's a little bit sobering when you first kind of maybe come across this concept, it's important in order to later understand how amazing the redemption that we have through Jesus is, to realize how bad our condition is to begin with. And I kind of use the example, it's kind of like going to a doctor. If you go to a doctor, you don't want them to sugarcoat what's wrong with you. If you've got cancer, you want them to tell you exactly how bad it really is, because only then can you begin to treat the problem and find what the cure, find how you're going to be healed. And so I think it's the same way for us spiritually. We have to get an accurate diagnosis of where we are, and total depravity tells us that, and it tells us no matter what I do, I'm never going to be able to save myself. I'm never going to be able to fix this problem of sin that I have. It's only going to be able to happen through what God does. And so I think this is a really, and I agree with the definition too. It doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, I can never do anything good. But I have this sin nature. It's this fatal flaw, this fatal kind of hereditary, again, kind of going back to original sin, this hereditary thing going through my life that means that no matter how I strive, I'm always going to fall short of what God and his standards are. And so I need help from outside of myself in order to ever be made right and holy in God's eyes again.
Yeah, I think Blakely really hit it on the head. You know, it's not the easiest thing for us to accept, but you know, when Adam and Eve had original sin, that was the punishment. We were completely fallen beings at that point. Our entire nature, you know, body, mind, and soul was all fallen and needed redemption. You know, we aren't sinners because we sin, but we sin because we're born sinners. We're born with that nature. That's the nature that's imputed to us. I think David says it pretty well in Psalms 51. I'll look at the first 5 verses here, but David says, "Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness. According to the greatness of your compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgression and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you only, I have sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified when you speak and blameless when you judge. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me." So that last part of that verse there is really what want to focus on. David doesn't say he was brought forth in sin because his mother did anything wrong. You know, it wasn't like she was, immoral when she had him, or at least we have no reason to believe that. But he was brought forth in sin just because that's our nature. That's how we all are. We are entirely dependent on God to overcome this condition. Romans 3, looking at a little different part, 10 through 12 says, "As it is written, there is none righteous, not even one. There is none who understand. There is none who seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they've become useless. Together, or there is no one who does good. There is not even one. So this rebellion and sin that we have, it's total. As I said, we won't go looking out for God. And again, like Blake said, it's not utter depravity. It doesn't mean we can't do anything good. It doesn't mean we're as bad as we possibly could be. But in a sense, it means we are evil. None of the good we can do in our unsaved state has any effect, or it's in a sense meaningless. And having a knowledge of what this is, I think actually helps us to better appreciate God and really appreciate how sovereign he is in his grace, because we understand how depraved we are and in such a terrible situation we are. And we understand the punishment. That punishment is eternal hell, damnation. That's what we deserve. So when we understand, our state, our desire, and then everything God's grace does for us that we could not do for ourselves, I think it gives us even a deeper understanding and appreciation of what God does.
Yeah, just to add my final touches on that, I think everything these two gentlemen have said is correct and biblical most of all. But a lot of people might object and say, well, you can have an intellectual knowledge of God. And I think you can, in a sense. I mean, you can look at nature and see God exists. But as Josh mentioned in Romans 3, there's no one who seeks after God. You cannot, by your own will, seek after God and truly commit yourselves to obeying him if God is not the one to initiate that conversation. Like it talks about in Ephesians, Paul says, you guys were dead in your trespasses and sins. In John chapter 6, it talks about, Jesus talks, and he says, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. And so you are not able to save yourself, as Blakely mentioned. You can't save others, which is maybe troublesome to think about and to believe, but also it relieves the burden because it allows God to better work in our lives. Just the final thought there is that as we begin to think of these next points, that the only thing I think you bring to your salvation is your sin. The only thing you bring is the negativeness, and God brings everything that is positive in your life.